All right. On today's episode, we interviewed David Sinkinson, where we really dived into what it looks like to go from creating a startup from scratch with a brother and really going off and getting a strong eight-figure exit, and really some of the mistakes that are made along the way, some of the positive things along the way, and really how to think about growing that business. And then ultimately what it looks like to be acquired and some of the things to consider there. So Casey, what were some of your bigger takeaways?
When you think about our podcast being about lower middle market businesses and all that good stuff, you also want to talk about these exits. What is the mindset of somebody exiting?
But there's a person buying.
Yeah, person buying. And then there's also a lot of startup behaviors that you do when you buy one of these companies, right? Which is iterate, learn, lean model canvas. All of these things can be a part of it. And we touch on every little thing in this podcast about that. And then also, man, when you have a big exit like that, just to meet somebody very humble who's created his Startup Different podcast. I mean, this is a very good interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And despite being a startup, to your point, Casey, we did dive in a little bit on kind of, again, how some of those principles still apply to a lower mid-level business, and kind of some of the things to consider, and how do you iterate and measure results and make decisions and all those things. And last but not least, right, again, putting yourself in the buyer's shoes, right? In this example, I mean, David walked away from the first offer from the same buyer. Right. They got the offer they wanted.
A lot of patience.
Decided to walk away, came back a year later, stronger, and was able to go get a much better offer. And so lots of nuggets on this one.
Hey guys, go ahead and just pause the podcast for a second. When you're buying a business, you need to ensure the financial health of the company. Quality of earnings is mission critical. It doesn't matter what size business you're buying. Patrick O'Connell Advisory Group, they're dynamic. They do a great job. They're going to look over your shoulder. They're going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And this guy's done over 200 buyers successfully, just like you. So reach out to him. And it's O'ConnellAdvisoryGroup.com. Click the link in our show notes. Can't live without this.
Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, looking forward to interview another fellow SaaS and kind of software friend. So, maybe before, just to get started, go ahead and just give us a little bit of background on just kind of what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I bootstrapped a software company with my brother, which is a little bit weird. So started coming, he's actually 10 years older than me, but still ended up working out pretty well. And we bootstrapped a company that was in the public safety space. So public safety software, it's kind of a niche market. And basically our product was this, what we called a mobile safety app. We launched this thing back in 2011. So the app stores were about a year old. And so, pretty early, so the rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing for the mobile app market. And basically how it worked is if you were an end user and you're at a school, because that was primarily where we did a lot of business was in higher education, you basically press a button and it would send you location in real time to the campus security or campus police force there, and they could come and help you. And it would all stem sort of out of this discussion I had because I was working at my alma mater and we did an audit of these blue light emergency poles. Most universities and colleges have them. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Seen them, yeah.
And a lot of them were broken. And so I just sort of pitched hey, what if we had a mobile app where you could do that? And put that up, kind of a early concept, and we rolled with it. And what was different about us too, as I should say, is we weren't just one app. So the company was called AppArmor, but we actually sort of created an assembly line for custom branded sort of personal safety mobile apps. So if you went to UCLA, it'd be called UCLA Bruin Safe. If you went to NYU, it'd be called Safe NYU. If you went to Princeton, it'd be Safe Princeton, so on and so forth. So it ended up being a really important part for our customers. We had a really quick success growing internationally and did really well.
Got it. And so, and we'll talk about that exit here in a little bit, but really just to kind of, you saw the gap in just the blue lights on campuses, right? The app, pretty simple, right? Push a button, get notified. Now, is I guess, what was that first sale that you guys did, right? And at what point did you think, okay, maybe there is something here? And how did you even go about knowing how to price that, right? Because it sounds like your customer was really the school, right? You're not doing the direct end user retail, you're selling to the school directly, right?
That's right. If you tried to sell this directly to consumers, I'm pretty sure you'd fail. In fact, I knew multiple companies that did try to do that and did largely fail because safety is one of those things. It's you don't buy a home security system till you've been broken into. It's kind of one of those things. Until something kind of bad happens to you, you don't really think about your personal safety all the time. I will say that our first sale was basically me being in that sort of conference room. I was on this campus, I think it was Campus Safety Working Group. Okay, fun name. I'm sitting there. There's committee members from different parts of the university, our first client. And I just, right place at the right time. And I will say too, the app did start out as that basic function, but we quickly learned in working really closely and iterating that version 1 with the customer that there was actually quite a few other features they wanted. In all, we had actually 50 different features on the platform, but Another big one was like emergency alerts for people on campus. If there's a bomb threat, a shooting, a major health event, or maybe a global pandemic, there are various reasons why you want to mass notify people. And so having that as an option through the mobile app, as well as other functions where you could share your location in real time. In terms of pricing, we always based it on the size of the institution, the number of potential users they could have on the app. This is kind of an accepted standard in that market. We actually based it on another piece of software that's called an emergency notification system, where you guys get Amber alerts, or maybe mass text messages or like weather alerts all the time. Those are mass notifications. We ended up actually building a complementary tool later on in our company's life to compete up market. We can get into that later if you want. But that pricing always worked based on the size of an institution. So if you were a small 2-year community college versus Vanderbilt University, you're going to pay a really, really different price.
So talk to me real quick, because I've done several startups myself, right? And I've been in that startup world, moved to the acquisition world thinking, hey, it's going to be an easier process. And not always easier, right? At least you don't have to come up with the revenue idea. But I would imagine you guys had that lean model canvas mentality. Did you guys, when you and your brother sat down and said, okay, here's the problem we're going to solve, how did that all come together for you? Like, did you guys use a certain methodology, or is it just like, oh my God, let's build it and figure it out as we go?
It was a lot of the latter, to be honest. We did. So I do think that, so first off, we're both kind of business book junkies. And one of my favorite books ever is The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And that's all that MVP, rapid iteration, the build, measure, learn loops. And so we did a lot of that with our customers, particularly our first, 5, 6, 7 customers. And by that, I mean, of course, major institutions. But those major institutions had a lot of feedback for us that was really, really important. And sort of tailoring the product to the needs of what the buyers needed. So those campus security and campus police groups on those campuses. And then over time, they also, of course, incorporated feedback that they were getting from end users. So from people who were actually using the app, where it was making a meaningful difference in helping them stay safe, those folks were also providing really good feedback. So we would take that information, we'd put it together. So Chris and I actually wrote a book called Startup Different. And one of the things, though, that is really challenging, and we have a chart for this, it's kind of like a curve going downward, is like when you first start working with a customer, that feedback is super high quality and it's super general. It helps for the entire market as you go to market. Then as time goes on, the feedback slowly becomes more specific to that customer. And then in the end, it's like way too specific, or sometimes even contradictory to stuff we got before. And so managing that relationship was really, really challenging. And then basically going to market, but also kind of being like, okay, guys, we really appreciate the feedback. We think we've got everything we need from you. We still want to be friends and you're still going to be our customers, but we're going to cut you off from custom development. So that was always a challenging conversation.
Yeah, that lean. So like taking it from an acquisition standpoint, right? So Feras and I acquired a business last year. It's had 155 employees, metal plating, 60 years old. Dirty, grungy, everything you can imagine, right? We come in and of course, similar to like a startup, right? You make out your list of what we call that low-lying fruit. What are the things we can improve upon and you build upon? And when we came into this first part of this year, right, we brought in somebody to run the company. And then he had his playbook on how to execute and get things done. Well, long story short, everything that could have been challenging this year was challenging. Everything that we thought we were doing was like, oh, you got met with like all these things breaking down and challenges and weather related. Long story short, we met with one of the GMs the other day and, I had this conversation with him. It's almost it's that lean startup mentality. I'm like, look, this is an existing business. However, your division is very it still needs to grow. It's still that mentality where we need to sell and be focused on sales. And he kind of came back to me and was like, listen, he's like, I'm starting to see what you guys are doing. And I'm like, look, if this was a startup, because it kind of is, right? We would learn, iterate, we would come back, we would adjust, we would pivot, we would move. And we've almost taken this group of people that have been doing the same thing for a very long time through that whole startup exercise. Pretty freaking amazing to just be into that lean model canvas, even with an existing business. Now it's been stressful.
I'll bet. That doesn't sound super pleasant.
Growth is stressful. It's very stressful, but it's very similar in the sense of where you're constantly redefining, like, hey, you move, it didn't work. You got to learn, you got to pivot, you got to keep moving.
Yeah, I think the really impressive thing about that lean canvas approach is that it can apply to a lot of different parts of your business. It doesn't have to just be a product specific thing. Like what you're trying to do is improve your scale, improve the way you go to market, improve the way you build the thing, improve the way you deal with employees. Like you can actually do quite a bit through that process. What you're doing though is overall is finding ways to vastly improve your profitability. And sometimes it takes, an acquisition, new people to come in with a totally different lens to say, well, why are you doing it this way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. Well, you can do it a lot better. Like you can do better than that. You can do it differently. And that was a big thing. I think for us, when we were thinking about how can we keep moving our company forward, we were absolutely obsessed with making these like little bets, making small changes, little tweaks, putting them out there, whether that was, again, something internal or external, measuring the results, seeing if it went well, and then doubling down on it if it went well or moving on if it didn't work. And that was a really, really good strategy for us. We had, 50, 60% profitability in our business at our peak. We did very, very well. And I think it was very much because we were obsessed with creating systems and structuring our business in as lean a method as possible.
And when you think about that, so when you talk about systems and structure, are you talking about like your organization, the people that worked for you?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the actual application of your app? What were those two things?
A bit of both, right? So I think on the one hand, sometimes when I use the word systems, it's a little bit confusing because I'm also in a SaaS company. But actually, a lot of the time, I'm just talking like it can be as silly as you make changes to your CRM, your customer relationship management software that actually makes your salespeople a little bit more efficient as they go through their day, making quotes or doing whatever it is. Like that's like a very minor thing, but improving these processes and these systems is super important. Now, for the mobile application, of course, this was like a constant thing. We would obviously be trying to leverage like new industry tools. The thing with the software, as you guys are going to know, is that it's a bit of a moving target. Things continuously improve and change. And we were always trying to keep up with those changes, make our software as up to date as possible, avoiding sort of legacy code. And if you want, we can definitely talk about tech debt and how awful it is. But it was one of those things where I think that, again, we just took that approach of rapid iteration and applied it to our business broadly.
Yeah. So maybe, at its core though, right? Your business was really, it sounds like you had a core app that you then white labeled flavors
Correct.
of, right? And so you kind of had this balance of how do you keep the core maintained while also giving enough customizations to the customers, right? That was essentially the core of the business, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we, if I can really quick, we actually did some interesting stuff to make this more. So I'll give you a good example of an innovation we did that made it so that the customer, like we were much more scalable suddenly. So our first few customers, they had to like email us to be like, hey, we want to do this to the app. We want to add a button here. We want to change color here. And we were like, holy crap. Like we can't manage this. This immediately doesn't work as a business, especially for the amounts we were charging in the early days. So we created our content management system for our native mobile apps so that the organization could pop in there, make those changes that they needed. And then that was something that immediately scaled us to the next level. Immediately we could be like, okay, we can, maybe in some cases when we would implement, we would do their first version. But then after that, it was sort of like a handoff, like, okay, good luck. If you need us, here's the support email address and, phone number or whatever. But most of the time they could manage it themselves.
Speaking of that, because I'm curious for myself, did you guys start them out of the box, native Android and native Apple? Or did you guys try to, use kind of pick your own, web interface to try to get you a centralized code base between the two?
We actually used a tool called that no longer exists, which is a good tech debt story if you want to hear it. But it was called Accelerator, Titanium Accelerator.
I know exactly. Titanium.
I
know. That's why I asked the question. So you guys did that path.
Yeah, we did that.
I've been there and done that, and it's tough. I mean, it's the balancing act, and even Facebook obviously completely, ripped it apart and decided to go native. So All right. Well, but so bring it back really quick though. I do want to go back to that first transaction, right? You sold it to the school, you figured out some sort of pricing model, they agreed to it, and you're, okay, now we have an app, it's flavored for the school, right? It's branded for the school. Who, if you hit the notification, who did you pipe that to, right? And do you guys even understand how to do that part? Or you're like, what do you guys want us to do? Do you want us to send security an email? Do you want us to, trigger a phone call? Or how did you guys go about solving that piece? Just to flush out the actual value prop, right?
It's a super valuable part of the market is this emergency notifications thing. There's actually somebody at every university and college in the world, for the most part, at least the Western world, where they're called an emergency director, emergency management coordinator, something like that. And their job is basically like twofold. One, have emergency plans when things go wrong. Sometimes this job is very important. If it's like a research university and they've got a bunch of stuff that has to be super cold and like the generators fail and then all that stuff dies, like that's those are the people who are trying to be like, okay, we have to have emergency generators. We have to have like infrastructure. Like they're thinking about those problems. The other thing though that they do is when something goes wrong, they need to be able to notify and connect to people. So in our early days, the mobile app was, I mean, again, this was like 2011. The app worked on BlackBerry. Just putting this in perspective.
No, I know exactly what you're talking. I was there developing in that same time frame.
So it's just a blanket push notification to all push subscribers to that app. Remember, each app was its own instance. So we could very easily categorize, okay, we know we have approximately, I don't know, 5,000 users on Android, 10,000 on iPhone. There's an emergency in there. There's an online dashboard console that the institution could use in the back end. That's where they did the content management, for example. And that's also where they could send mass notifications out the app. So push notifications specifically for the mobile app, because that's the endpoint. Later on, we would sell more stuff. We proliferated our product because we looked up market at our competitors. And because amazingly, we had competitors, first off. Such a niche market, but we had some. And looking up market, they were doing this emergency notification thing. They sent text messages, they sent emails, they sent voice calls, they locked computer screens. They did all this other stuff. And we were like, we can do this. And by the way, their software looks kind of old because it was old. A lot of it came out in like 2005, 2006. We saw one that was built on Cold Fusion. So we're like, okay, let's take a shot at this.
I've not heard of Cold Fusion in a while.
Yeah, there you go, right? So we took a shot at it and we did really well. And it was so complementary to our existing customer base because they were looking for ways to do mass notifications. And we could have it all integrated in one place, all one dashboard, all one workflow in our system, as opposed to normally it would be you had to go through multiple different systems. So send an alert on system A, that does emails and phone calls. The next system does text messages. This system does whatever. For us, it was like, okay, now welcome to one dashboard. We can do all this stuff in one. It was a very compelling value prop over time. And we started to actually displace our competitors with software that they sort of considered safe. Like this was their bread and butter. Mm-hmm. And that was, getting into the acquisition game here a little bit. We were really stepping on their toes and they were starting to notice. And that was our intention. We were trying to kind of piss them off a little bit.
No, it's by design. I mean, in that world, you're going to have to get to an omni app, right? Like it's not going to be the one-offs that solves anything. It's going to... And then you even start to get, even in your space, once you've solved all of the safety related stuff, then you have the bigger stuff, which is like all of the, the blackboards or whatever it is that schools use where every student is installing this app. And now you have kind of that differentiation between our students installing 3 apps or are they installing 2?
Oh,
or is
man.
Those guys start to eat you up and consolidate. So consolidation, it makes it fun. So yeah, it sounds like you have a story to tell here.
Yeah, sorry. It's just like, I think your Blackboard, right? Like just like all of a sudden it just starts shaking. So basically, yeah, we ran into them all the time in the market because they were basically the dominant LMS, so learning management system. So they were basically
dominant
everywhere.
And like kind of garbage and data and they still stuck around.
Yeah. Really, most people didn't like them, which was like very funny to me. I would talk to them and be like, oh, we don't have to talk to Blackboard. And they had actually created like a really crummy mass notification system and even worse sort of mobile app component. So in a way, it was actually kind of good because they sort of educated the market that these functions are complicated and don't work that well. So when we showed up and we're like, oh, we can do mass notifications better than Blackboard, customer says, show me. And in the first 5 minutes of a demo, me or my salespeople would be like, we'd go through, we send a mass notification. We could hit the person's phone who was on the demo with us. We're doing all kinds of cool stuff. And they go, wow, that's so much easier. And I'm like, yeah. And it was kind of this, that's kind of your best case scenario. I feel like for a lot of go-to-market strategies, if you can find a competitor, big or small or whatever, but that educates them sort of poorly or leaves them with a bad taste in their mouth, that's a great opportunity to go in and just crush them. And we did, and it wasn't just us for what it's worth, but we did do really, really well competing against Blackboard in the specific like safety, security, public safety component of their software platform. And that actually led to a lot of deals. I remember they actually started discontinuing their mass notification functionality and mobile safety sort of functionality. I think around like 2018, they were just like kind of walking away from it, or at least not supporting it anymore, which is basically dead. And it was just like a feeding frenzy for all these other mass notification companies and us, because it was just these customers were no longer supported.
So pretty amazing. So 2011, right? This is where you and your brother start off. It's just you two, right? So at what year did you look at your brother and go, wow, we are no longer a startup. We are officially in business.
When they sold.
But a little bit before, just a touch, I would say. So I remember we were in a business co-working space, and I remember they used to put on these like beer clocks on Thursday. It was really fun. They actually taught us a lot about company culture. It was great. And so we go in there, we're having some beers, and I was talking to the person who was running the co-working place, and I said, I was really excited. We made our first $1 million. Okay. And this was probably, I don't know, year 4 or 5. And she turns to me and looks at me and goes, the first million is the hardest one. Just dead fired it right at me. I was like, I don't know. It was pretty hard. I can't imagine the next one's so easy. That year, I think we got to 2 million. We started to see, we actually were one of the 500 fastest growing companies in Canada, which is kind of like the world's, smallest big screen TV, but still I'm pretty happy about it.
Still exciting.
And we ended up we were like 30th for software in Canada. Like we were doing really, really well. We had 400% year-over-year growth. So we're just exploding all of a sudden. And we sort of, if you think about like Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm, like we'd crossed the chasm.
Yeah.
We got to that early majority. We were just, here we go. That's when I was like, okay, this is the real deal. Now
you crossed for those listeners. I mean, it's usually not one chasm though, right? I did another podcast interview the other day where I was being interviewed. And, I like to say with any company, you get to these different points where you have to make the next leap. And, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're taking a lot of risk. But once you get past it, then things get easier until you hit the next chasm. So each company kind of has these different phases. And so
I think that's true, actually. I would say this one's like the initial, one of the biggest ones is that, I'm going to get early adopters to the early majority because you just don't have that much revenue yet. So when you get there, it just feels a lot more comfortable when you suddenly like, okay, our marketing budget can be hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars all of a sudden. That's totally doable. Whereas before you're kind of, you're eating less well, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And then as you go up that, I have it right here. Yeah. As you go up
this video, crossing the chasm right there.
It is a good book.
As you go up sorry, I want to talk into the mic. As you go up that chart, I think that what happens is you learn that the things that you did before to get you to that point no longer serve you, and you have to change. And it's really difficult because that's what got you there. Yep. It's really uncomfortable to go to that next phase. So I totally agree with you, actually. Feras. I think
that's funny. So we did our annual planning with the leadership this week, actually Monday, Tuesday, and one of the big things I kind of pounded in everyone's head is like the way we got from there to here is not how we get from here to there.
Yeah,
right. And so
100%.
People have to do that, and it requires change, rethinking things, and put everything on the table for discussion to figure out what still applies and what doesn't. So
yeah, I think 100%. So agreed. Yeah.
So David, take us to the exit.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think most of our listeners here are like, wow, amazing startup growth. But let's get into the M&A stuff, because I imagine that is where, all of your dreams came true, right? All the hard work, the payoff. But let's talk about
when
how
you start
did you
thinking
find
about
it?
the exit.
Like what happened? How long did it take? I mean, give us all the good stuff that we can get into on the exit side.
Sure. Let me start with a quick story. Sure. So we had a weird thing happen. We had somebody come through our sales funnel, and they had this website. They looked like semi-legitimate. We had been trying to grow in the corporate space because big companies have a lot of people. They have big campuses, and they need to notify them and have tools. Anyway, so we're like, okay, this seems like kind of legit. They're going through a sales process like very quickly, like a little bit unusual. And then they get to the legal contract and they signed it within an hour. This never happens. Like a contract review is a 2.5 week kind of thing at a big organization. And so I was like, okay, this smells rotten. What's going on? And so we look them up and we Google their company, and it's funny. There was their company, and then there was another company with a slightly different name with the exact same website. Okay, so I was like, this is sketchy. I was like, we're being frauded somehow. I don't know exactly how, but this person's up to something. So we go and we look at the website. We look at they're basically identical, except at the very last page, the about us of the fraudulent website was the address of one of our competitors. Okay. And I was like, that's interesting. And so like a couple of things I could have done. So first off, was like, okay, well, first off, this guy was just trying to get our information, steal our stuff, learn our pricing, do all that kind of thing. Clearly working for that other company. Whether they told him to do this or not, wasn't really sure. But I emailed the CEO of one of our competitors. Was like, hey, heads up, we found this bullshit. Might want to deal with that. We're not going to, and just kind of a shot across the bow, right?
You know the CEO of that company, to be more specific.
Of the company that that competitor.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of a shot across the bow. That's like a warning shot. Like, hey, knock it off, right? Yeah. But the other thing that I did, I was like, okay, this person though could be screwing up things for our other competitors. But instead, what I decided to do, rather than just let this person keep doing that, was I actually reached out to a few other strategics and their CEOs and said, hey guys, we found this. This happened to us. This is some BS. Heads up. And that was my first interaction. One of them was anyway. It was my first interaction with the company that bought us. Okay, this was 2 years before we were acquired.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I kind of built rapport, credibility, trustworthiness by accident. I kind of wanted to be bought, obviously, but I just did it in advance. I didn't really know if it was going to lead to anything, but it's important when you understand our story, because in our story, we didn't go and shop our company. We didn't have bankers. We didn't go through this process. Mm-hmm. So instead, what we did, we basically had these ongoing sort of side conversations with different strategics. Now, we weren't colluding or anything. We weren't like, you win this deal, we'll win that deal, that kind of thing. It wasn't like that. It was very much these cagey, kind of weird conversations with them about like, what are you thinking? Da, 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 da. And one day we got an email from a company called TCV, Technology Crossover Ventures. It's a large private equity group. I think they originally invested in Netflix, so they're fine. And they owned one of our larger strategic competitors, Rave Mobile Safety. And they said, hey, are you guys interested in selling? And this is when we first started talking to them. And I noticed we were getting our door banged down from different companies that buy businesses that are profitable. And by this point, we had been doing about 7 million ARR and, about 60% profit margin. So like very healthy profitability. So they saw what we were doing and they said, do you want to be sold? And so we went down this conversation and my co-founder makes a famously big blunder. If you guys are sales guys or have many, I'm sure you've worked with plenty of them. One trick with sales is you never put a number out there. Uh-huh. And they literally asked him verbatim, hey, what would you be willing to sell for? And without even skipping a beat, we were on a Zoom call and I was in a different place. Otherwise I would have kicked him physically. He goes, 20 million. Just blurts it right out. And I said, oh God, you never do that. You want to say, my answer is going to be as much as we can possibly get, as much as you think it's worth. You know what I mean? Something like that. Anyway, so then we get an offer for $20 million, unsurprisingly. Big, lots of strings attached. And all.
So wait, 20 million and your revenue was what? And your
it was like 7 million. 7 million.
Revenue
ARR.
was 7 million, and you said 60% profit margin. So 3x. So if you just cap that out, right, they're at a 6x multiple, right? 6.5.
So we were kind of like, or I was like, this is horrible because we had this good opportunity, kind of like worked into this weird thing. Yeah. Anyway, so we kind of like tried to push them back for more, but it wasn't going to work out because they had kind of like, they thought they were going to get a really good deal. Like they were like kind of in on that now. They thought they met our number. And so we said no. We said no. We actually walked. And we said, we're going to bet on ourselves. We're going to try and boost our numbers and we'll see you in a year's time. I should say, I guess accurately, we were at about 6 million by that point. And the next year we were at 7 million. So we bet on ourselves. We had a really good year and we came back to them and they had a really bad year. So they had missed their sales targets for 2 years, basically because of the pandemic. And, for private equity, that's not going to work. And they're going to spin that company and sell it off really soon. And we kind of knew that too. We could just kind of tell. So we went back to them. They doubled the offer, $40 million if you do it really, really soon. We wanted to fit you into our company launch in January of that year. This was in November of the year before. So November of 2021. And we said we'd do it and we were off.
Waited in patience 1 year and you made another $20 million. And
on yourself.
But
cool, right?
But the question is, how do they not feel like they're going to offer 40 and you're going to say, you know what, we changed our mind?
Yeah, I was right. I mean, I think there's got to be a certain level of desperation. I think also though too, like remember back in like 2021, like money was like really cheap, it
was.
And they, I think, were also really prioritized. Like they were the kind of private equity group where they wanted to spin off that company really soon. They were at like 4 years of owning them. Like you're in that 5-year, 3 to 5 year window. Like private equity groups are looking to, make their investment. And I think they just were like, we need those numbers to boost these numbers, and then we're off to the races. So, but I think they also knew that if they doubled the offer, we weren't going to walk. We were going to take that one.
Exciting. And so when did y'all close? What was the actual closing date?
Close date was February 1st, 2022. We went through due diligence over Christmas time. I remember on Christmas Eve at 11 p.m. meeting with our lawyers. So that was, Santa might've been on the roof. Uh-huh. Wow. And we got it done. And you had an army of lawyers and an army of accountants, and we got it done.
Awesome. And so maybe just to put a bow on that. So did you set a 40 million price point, or they just said, hey, we'll double it?
They just said, hey, we'll double it. And we didn't.
You made sure your brother wasn't doing the negotiations at that time, right? You just left him off.
I was on the email. I was on the email. I was like, Chris, for the love of God, say nothing. I love my brother, by the way, but he's not a great salesperson. He's an incredible coder, amazing coder. But
so you went through due diligence and man, it was done. So how many employees did y'all end up selling with? How many employees did you have?
Yeah, so we had 20 employees, like headcount of 20. So small firm,
your brother and 18 other people.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Did you guys do the traditional, everybody got some equity and all that good stuff? Or was everybody growing it for the growth?
So we had 3 things that we were worried about. We were worried about our technology. We were worried about our people, and we were worried about our customers. So these were like our sort of outside of the purchase price, these were like our altruistic goals. And for the people, everybody got a raise. Everybody got better benefits right away because we were a smaller company and we had decent benefits, but like the company that we were being absorbed into had really, really good benefits. So that was good. And key employees got, some effectively like equity in the business. So,
in the new business or in the current one?
The new one. So
got it. But you guys, as part of the way you guys had structured it, you guys were able to kind of, it wasn't like a traditional startup where everybody's getting a comp package of base and a bunch of equity, right? You guys kept that, you gave them the bases, and then as part of the new deal, people kind of got the upside there.
Cap table was super clean. It was me and my brother.
Nice.
That's awesome.
And then, and I guess, so speaking of, what was some of the clause that were put in to, in the new deal, right? To keep you guys on board. And obviously they compensated your team, so they're still motivated, but you have to stick around for a year or two. Clearly not past
the
that.
Original, actually, there's one other thing too. On the $20 million deal, so the original deal that we turned down, the other thing that was happening is I was expecting my first kid. And I was really, really worried about being tied to big sales targets and not sleeping at night. So it's kind of, anyway. So there were other reasons. And it also, though, had a very intense earnout period. It was, I think, like 2 years or something like that. That sounds aggressive. I think it was like 1.5 years, which isn't crazy for the world of earnouts, but in the context of what happened in the end, our final earnout was 3 months. But we stayed around. We stayed around because we knew that, we wanted to make sure that our company and our people and our technology would continue to thrive and be worked into that new ecosystem before we left. And we also knew that, we assumed anyway, and later confirmed, that they were going to turn around and sell that company. And they did. They sold the company to Motorola Solutions for $560 million. And so we participated a little bit in that. We did not get $560 million. We got a little bit of money in there too, which made it worthwhile for us to stick around as well. But I think all in all, we really wanted to make sure that the company was in a good place by the time we left. So,
that is like the story. That is the epic story of startup to just, a total of 9 years, you said, with you and your brother?
Yeah, about 9 years. Yeah.
Y'all are still, I take it, good friends, still brothers? Or
we still hang out.
You'll always be brothers, but not sure if you like each other, right?
No, we're good. We're good. I think, we'll probably start another business at some point, because we just work really well together. And it's not to say we didn't have our fights, because damn, we had our fights. I'm reading this book by Adam Grant called Think Again. And there's this whole concept of constructive disagreement. And I realized that we were very much in this, you can get hot, but not angry at each other. And that was very much the way my brother and I would work in some of the more stressful decision-making. We would find data, we would keep talking, but we would generally disagree and try to work through what do we think is the best path. And some of our best decisions came from a lot of conflict. Whereas some of our, counterintuitively, some of our worst decisions came from where we were both like, yeah, that's a great idea right away, without validating it. Just like, yeah, that's good. Let's go. And that usually was the bad stuff. So
totally.
Yeah.
So talk to us real quick, because I know we're going to be coming up to the end here. You took your concepts and you created a podcast and you wrote a book. So tell us about it.
Yeah. So let's start with the podcast. So my podcast is called Startup Different. I actually host it with my brother. I'm the chief podcast officer. So I really want to make sure I had a stupid title. So I got it. So we interview entrepreneurs, founders from all stages, from, early revenue to exited multiple times. It's been a lot of fun. It's a fun show. And then otherwise, that we also have our book called Startup Different, the myth busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. That's available on Amazon or Indigo, or wherever you find your books online. And it's basically a chronological story of our company. We bust 33 different startup myths, and it's pretty light. There's references to Zoolander and stuff in there. So it's a nice read. You're going to enjoy yourself. So
Zoolander is one of the good ones.
We'll put links to that in the show notes for the listeners. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And then maybe one last question before we kind of move on to the rocket round too. For the employees that got the equity in the next, in the company that acquired you, and then they got bought, was that life-changing for them?
It wasn't, but it was a significant amount of money anyway. I think it made it fun. I think they liked that they got it, but and I should say too, key employees versus all employees, there were some differences there, but all in all, I think that at least for those folks, I think what was interesting is my team went from being, most of them were hired right out of school. That's just how we like to hire. Yeah. We brought them up. I like a sports analogy for this. They were like the farm team. We brought them up to the big leagues. And then they moved into a company that was 10 times bigger than us. And then they moved into a company that was 100 times bigger than that. Yeah. So for their careers, I think there's a humongous amount of benefit there for them.
No, absolutely. Even my software company, our devs, you get well-rounded at a startup, right? You learn up and down the stack. You're not just one piece, and you can get a job almost anywhere. And so, it's kudos. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So let's jump into our rocket round.
Cool.
All right. This is where we ask our guest 3 questions and get to know a little bit more about them. All right. So David, what do you like to do best in your free time?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. You're gonna think this is really weird and it's cool, but I like to make sourdough bread.
Hey, I was learning how to make that too. So pizza, making Neapolitan pizza was my COVID hobby.
Oh, nice.
I got an uni oven, got really good at Neapolitan, and I learned a lot more about how sourdoughs are made.
That's awesome. Remember, everybody was like really into it during the pandemic. Like there was like a whole sourdough like craze early in the pandemic. So I've been doing it before then. I did it before school.
Yeah. So, you're an OG, so I had to teach an OG. It's funny, my CFO, she's Canadian, so I've taught her two phrases, right? One of them is OG. She didn't know that one. Her daughter and kids knew that. And the other one, you'd appreciate this one, hockey stick growth. So, of course. And I'm like, come on, Canadians should know the hockey stick thing, but I guess that's more of a tech term that we all talk
I know that for sure. I think that like if you talk to, I do a lot of the startup mentorship here in Toronto, Canada. And it's so funny because you see that chart at some point in the deck, right? At some point you're going to see the hockey stick.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Anyway.
All right. So sourdough bread. So next time I'm in Canada, we will get some bread.
Hey, I'll happily get you a loaf. So
do it. Yeah. All right. Next question. Most memorable moment in your business journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many different moments. I think I was wondering if I should go with something negative or positive. And I'm going to go with positive because I'm an optimistic kind of guy. So I can remember when basically we competed for this really difficult to get RFP, so request for proposal in the state of Florida. And in Florida, they had the terrible Parkland shooting. And they came up with this a tender for an app that would be basically an app where you could report suspicious activity and it'd be linked to law enforcement and that kind of stuff. And it was a dogfight of an RFP. We had people call us pretending to be the decision committee, being like, "Oh, you weren't selected. Don't check anymore. See you later. Bye." Like we had crazy stuff happen. Anyway, we ended up winning it. It was a huge moment for us, both from a revenue and I think a credibility perspective. And this is a bit of a political thing to say, but at the time, the president of the United States actually tweeted about the work the state of Florida was doing and featured the app in their tweet. And that is the now president-elect of the United States, President Trump.
I guess it was like 2016.
What didn't he tweet about, though? I'm not trying to take it away from you.
Yeah, no offense, but he's tweeted about just about everything that there could be tweeted about.
You know what? He definitely didn't write it. Like somebody wrote it for. It was like so nice and well worded. I'm like, this is not.
Yeah, that's not it. No. Awesome. All right. So what is your favorite tool or resource?
Right now, I am all into ChatGPT. I love it. I have my own GPTs. Like I pay for ChatGPT, which is like kind of weird, I guess. And I can ask it different questions about the podcast. I can ask it to spitball this thing. I can do. It's just great. It's just such a fun tool, and I find it very, very helpful at a lot of the different things I can do. During my business, we had a lot of different tools that I leaned on pretty heavily. One of them, just because it's a bit more obscure, I'll throw it out there as a tool that we used to use, and because we competed with a lot of public contracts. So because universities and colleges in many cases were public, there was this tool called GovSpend, and we could actually look up the contract that school had for emergency notifications and which vendor it was, when they won it, when the terms were up. And that was such a powerful tool for us to go to market. It was
probably need that in the utility space. So that's one of our verticals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. It's really good. Highly recommend. Also wasn't that expensive. For the value you get out of it is insane. So
love it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the episode. David, thank you for sharing. I mean, wealth of information on that one.
And how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find us on social. It's all at Startup Different. You can find me on LinkedIn, David Sinkinson, easy enough to find. If you're looking for the title, it's the Chief Podcast Officer one is me. And yeah, of course, check out the book on Amazon. And the podcast is wherever you get your podcasts.
Perfect. And we'll link those in the show notes.
Thank you for spending some time with us. It was a great story. And man, to all your success, I'm going to get the book.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. That's awesome.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.